I woke up to the sound of laughter, barking dogs, and a portable speaker blasting early 2000s pop music. That alone wasn't unusual for a Sunday, except it was coming from my backyard. Not the patio. Not the ranch side trail. I mean the literal backyard of my lakefront ranch property. Coffee in hand, I stepped out expecting maybe a raccoon rustling in the trash or my dog chasing squirrels. What I found instead stopped me cold. There was a crowd of at least 20 people, lawn chairs unfolded, kayaks docked on my private ramp, coolers chilling in the shade of my pecan tree, and smack dab in the middle, someone had cut a 6-foot-wide hole in my wrought iron fence. Welded hinges. A latch. A gate. A real one. As if I had invited the whole HOA over for a potluck on land I never gave up. And sitting at a picnic table she clearly brought herself was Karen. Clipboard in one hand, mimosa in the other. I hadn't even said a word before she looked up, squinted behind her oversized sunglasses, and said with a cheery smirk, "Don't worry, Rob. The community thanks you for sharing your lake." I stood there, stunned into silence, for a solid 10 seconds. Karen had always been a handful, the type who corrected your mailbox height and counted how many times your grass was mowed in a month. But this was another level. I looked around again to make sure I hadn't accidentally wandered into someone else's backyard. Nope. Same windmill. Same boathouse I'd built with my dad. Same row of marked cypress trees I'd planted by hand when my first dog passed away. It was still my land. Except now, it looked like someone had booked it for a field day without so much as a heads-up. I walked toward the new gate, inspecting the crude welds on the posts, the hacked metal edges. This wasn't a prank. Someone brought tools. Someone brought a plan. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "what is this?" She didn't miss a beat. Community access. It's been discussed for months. We even held a board vote. Majority ruled. I blinked. "I'm not part of the HOA. She waved that off like it was a technicality. "You're adjacent. That gives you associate impact. It's in the bylaws. Section 6, paragraph 12. "No, it isn't," I snapped. "I've read your bylaws. I'm not even in your development. I bought this ranch before the subdivision was built." Karen shrugged and sipped her mimosa. "Property lines are fluid in cases of community benefit. You wouldn't want to be the guy who denies a bunch of kids a lake day, would you?" Just then, a kid in floaties launched himself off my dock with a cannonball that soaked half of my fishing gear. Another dog bolted across my tomatoes. An older man dragged my canoe onto the bank like it was community rental. I raised my voice slightly. "This is private land. You're trespassing." Karen stood up now, suddenly acting like I was the one disrupting the harmony. "Rob, don't make this difficult. The lake belongs to all of us. You've had exclusive use of it for years. It's time to share. Think of the children." I've learned that when someone says, "think of the children," they've usually already stolen your lunch and want you to smile about it. I turned and stormed back into the house, calling the county sheriff's department. The dispatcher took my complaint but warned it would likely be treated as a civil matter unless something got destroyed. By the time I returned to the yard, someone had opened my bait freezer and was using it to chill sodas. One guy had taken off his shirt and was trying to install a volleyball net using my fence posts. And in the corner, Karen was directing more people through the gate like it was a hotel check-in. I confronted her again, this time holding the deed and survey map in hand. She actually laughed. "Oh, come on, Rob. That's just paper. We've got community consensus. You'd be amazed what that covers." At that point I realized something crucial. Karen wasn't mistaken. She wasn't misinformed. She knew exactly what she was doing. This was a hostile land grab dressed in yoga pants and HOA jargon. I asked them all, firmly, directly, and legally, to leave. They refused. One woman said she was on break, and another told me I had bad energy. The most surreal part? Some of them actually thought I was the intruder. That's what happens when someone like Karen spins a lie so confidently that people follow it without question. By late afternoon, the crowd started to die down, but the damage remained. A cracked dock plank. Trash all along the shore. Grass burned from a grill someone dragged into the yard. And worst of all, the gate remained. Welded. Permanent. Karen gave me a wink on her way out and said, "You'll get used to it. We're planning a luau next Saturday." That night I didn't sleep. I paced. I stared at the wall with the kind of quiet rage that only land theft can produce. The thing about owning land, real, tangible dirt and grass and water, is that it's not just about property. It's about pride. About legacy. About peace. Karen had shattered all three. I looked out at the moonlit lake and swore one thing to myself: if she wanted to test the limits of community access, she was about to learn how fast I could build a limit she wouldn't forget. The next morning, I drove straight to the county assessor's office and pulled every plat, zoning code, and archived easement I could find. I highlighted my property lines. I verified fence placements. I found no public right-of-way, no shared access, no loophole. My lake yard was locked in tight under my name. Karen's Section 6 fantasy was pure fiction. But I didn't stop there. I also noticed something else in the records, a thin strip of land behind their HOA clubhouse that looked odd. I made a note. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She posted pictures of the lake day in the HOA Facebook group with captions like, "Lake Day Success. Thanks to Rob for supporting the community, and more fun next week. Bring floats." I commented politely, stating it was unauthorized. My comment was deleted in under 10 minutes. Then I was blocked. By Wednesday, she had the nerve to send out flyers with a printed map showing new community lake access through my gate. It even had parking instructions on my gravel trail. That evening, 2 SUVs showed up, and their drivers casually walked their dogs along the shoreline. One even waved to me and said, "You've got such a welcoming property. Wish more people were like you." I decided that night to stop playing defense. If they wanted a gate, I'd give them a wall. A real one. Big. Legal. Unignorable. Something no HOA committee or clipboard crusader could ever cut through. And I wasn't going to wait for permission or apologies. I'd lost a weekend. I'd lost my dock. I was not about to lose my land. By the time the sun set on Thursday, I'd already made the calls. Concrete. Brick. A construction crew I helped after a tornado cleanup. I offered cash, hot coffee, and a chance to build something legendary. They accepted. The gate wasn't going to be patched. It was going to be erased. Buried behind 12 feet of concrete, mortar, and brick. And when Karen came back for her luau, she'd find the only way into my lake yard was a map, a drone, and a very long ladder. By the time Friday morning rolled around, the air on my property felt like it had shifted. Not the weather. No, the atmosphere itself. That quiet kind of pressure you get when you know a storm's coming but it hasn't hit yet. The gate in my lake yard was still there, still swinging like it belonged. A few early risers from the HOA wandered through again, as if nothing had changed. One couple even brought a thermos and folding chairs, setting up like they were at a private resort. I watched them from the porch, silently sipping coffee, waiting to see if they'd even acknowledge me. They didn't. That's when I realized this wasn't a one-off event. The HOA wasn't just testing boundaries. They were rewriting them. I decided to document everything. I walked the length of the newly cut gate and took photos from every angle, hinges, latch, where it had been torch cut into my original fence. Then I turned the camera toward the lake and filmed the group lounging on my property. I spoke into the phone, calmly narrating the date, time, and ongoing trespass. As soon as I finished, I backed it up on 3 drives and emailed a copy to my attorney friend, Marcus. He was the kind of lawyer who found joy in crushing HOA overreach, and I knew this would interest him. Meanwhile, Karen had added a new layer to her madness. By noon, someone had installed a wooden sign over the gate that read, "Karen's Creek Cove, Private HOA Entry." Private HOA entry on my land. I don't know if I was more shocked by the audacity or the craftsmanship. It even had little vines painted on the edges and a painted duck silhouette. This wasn't improvisation. This was planned. There were 2 new lawn chairs, a plastic flamingo, and a solar-powered tiki torch planted next to my dock. When I approached the fence again, 2 kids asked me if I was the lake manager and whether I'd be opening the community snack shack later. I was speechless. That afternoon, I filed a formal trespass affidavit at the sheriff's office, attaching all the photos, videos, and land documentation. The deputy on duty, a lanky guy named Cooper, seemed sympathetic but hesitant. He looked over my materials and nodded slowly. Then he said the worst thing a landowner can hear. Unfortunately, sir, unless they break something or you've got a restraining order, this is likely gonna be treated as civil. You'll want to talk to code enforcement or sue the HOA directly. That was the problem. Karen was smart. She wasn't vandalizing property. She was just coordinating access and letting others do the stepping. It was a chess game, and she was 5 smug moves ahead. I needed leverage, something that would force the issue out of gray area and into action. So I doubled down on research. That evening, I drove out to the county records office again, staying until the lights flickered and the janitor hinted I should leave. I dug through plat maps, zoning documents, anything connected to the HOA or its common areas. And that's when I found it. A dusty folder marked, Phase 2 Transfer a Sunridge Meadows, HOA. Inside was a survey map showing that the HOA's clubhouse, yes, the one where Karen held all her little board meetings, was built 2 feet over the setback line. Not a big deal on paper. But the land it overlapped? It belonged to the same lot series my ranch was filed under. The HOA had been encroaching by less than a few feet, but for a private building that hosted meetings, parties, and official gatherings, that meant they were technically operating on land that didn't belong to them. That changed everything. Now I had something to play with. I scanned the documents and sent them to Marcus immediately, along with a note. "You're going to love this." His reply came within 20 minutes. Time to shake the tree. Back at the ranch, things escalated again. On Saturday morning, I was woken not by birds or the rustle of wind through the trees, but by the sound of drilling. I threw on boots and ran out to see what was going on. Karen and 3 other HOA volunteers were installing a new post for what looked like a weatherproof bulletin board. On my property, right beside the gate. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" I asked. Karen turned around, beaming. "We're posting our summer schedule. We've got lake yoga at 9 a.m., paddleboarding at noon, and a potluck from 4 to 7. You're welcome to join, Rob." I nearly lost it. "You are not authorized to put anything on this land. I've already filed trespass complaints." Karen didn't flinch. "We've formed a subcommittee. The board voted. We believe your land was improperly designated private, and we're initiating historical claim procedures." I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was funny. Because it was so insane that laughter was the only logical response. "Historical claim? Are you serious?" She nodded solemnly, as if what she was saying carried any legal weight at all. The lake was enjoyed by the community before the fence was even erected. I've spoken to at least 5 residents who swam here as teenagers. That creates precedence. I pointed toward the barn. "And I used to nap in that barn as a teenager. Doesn't mean the town can hold church services in it." Karen gave me a tight-lipped smile. "You're welcome to call the sheriff again, but we've already briefed them." She wasn't lying. When I called the sheriff this time, the dispatcher curtly said they'd already spoken to representatives from the HOA, and that they'd be treating the situation as a civil land dispute unless violence occurred or property was damaged. I hung up, furious. Later that evening, I noticed the gate had been freshly painted. Someone had even added a little flower box beneath the sign. My dog barked at the motion, and I caught a teenager casually walking their cat on a leash through my yard, as if it were a public park. That's when I made up my mind. The gate was no longer the problem. It was the symbol, the gateway, the bridge into delusion. And bridges can be burned or bricked. I took a walk across the perimeter and marked out measurements with bright orange tape. My property, my wall. No permits needed on private AG land for decorative structures. Marcus confirmed it. I'd build it wide. I'd build it tall. I'd make sure it couldn't be climbed without rock climbing gear and a permission slip. But I wouldn't just react. I'd retaliate with precision. I made calls that night. Old friends in the construction trade. Guys I'd helped during hurricane cleanup who owed me a favor. A supplier from Austin who once stored pallets on my land rent-free. I told them what I needed and told them I'd pay in cash if it meant it happened fast. The plan wasn't just to close a gate. It was to make a statement no one could ignore. By Sunday night, I had a crew, a plan, and a delivery schedule. The wall would go up in one shot, overnight. No permits, no warning, no time for Karen to call her imaginary legal team. I even had an extra twist in mind. A reinforced concrete core that would make it near impossible to knock down without a wrecking crew. This wasn't going to be some ornamental garden barrier. This was going to be my Alamo. As I stood near the lake watching the last of the. At exactly 10:47 p.m. on Sunday night, the first load of bricks arrived. A flatbed truck rolled up to the ranch's side road with its headlights off and its engine low, guided in by flashlight beams and whispered instructions. My crew, made up of 6 guys I trusted like brothers, moved with clockwork precision. They didn't need speeches or explanations. Most of them had already heard the basics. Crazy HOA lady, trespassing, the gate, and all of them had the same reaction. They laughed, shook their heads, and said the same thing. We're gonna build her a surprise she'll never forget. While the rest of the neighborhood slept peacefully behind their picket fences, my yard transformed into a covert construction site. We kept the lights low, the noise minimal, and every move calculated. We had about 7 hours before the HOA's joggers and dog walkers began their morning rounds. That was our window. 7 hours to lay a 12-foot-tall, 30-foot-long brick wall across the entire section of fencing that had been cut. No gate. No opening. Just smooth, unbroken wall, blending perfectly with the fence but standing like a red brick exclamation point right in the middle of their delusion. The footing was poured first. We used quick-set concrete, pre-mixed on-site in 3 rotating mixers that hummed steadily through the night. While some guys mixed, others cleared the brush line, marked the trench, and leveled the ground with quiet precision. We poured the foundation extra thick, wide enough to withstand a tank, if needed. It wasn't just for strength. It was a statement. I didn't want there to be even the possibility of knocking it over. I wanted Karen to look at that wall and feel like she'd slammed into the final page of her HOA fantasy. By midnight, the first row of bricks was laid. We moved fast but clean. Mortar was smoothed, edges aligned, layers checked with levels. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I paced the perimeter like a general inspecting a battlefield, occasionally grabbing a trowel to lay bricks myself. It was cold and damp and beautiful. The moon overhead shimmered on the lake, and the silence was broken only by the scrape of brick and the occasional laugh whenever someone made a sarcastic crack about HOA bylaws. Think she'll try to post a yoga schedule on this thing? One guy joked, smearing mortar across the joint. Only if she brings a step ladder, another replied, setting a brick. By 3 a.m., the wall was halfway done. It rose above shoulder height, casting a long shadow toward the lake. I took a moment to step back and admire the work so far. It was strange how something as simple as bricks and mortar could feel like justice. But it did. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. Literal and personal. 4 years I'd kept to myself. Mowed my own fields. Maintained my property without fuss. But Karen saw that quiet as weakness. And when people like her see someone not pushing back, they think they're entitled to whatever they want. At 5 a.m., with the first streaks of pink on the horizon, the final rows were being laid. The structure stood tall now, solid and silent. A smooth brick wall with no gaps, no seams, no hinges, and no point of entry. One guy sprayed it down gently with water to clean off excess mortar, while another brushed the surface smooth. The only thing we left was a tiny signature at the bottom corner, a single brick slightly rotated so that it jutted out half an inch. Our version of a calling card. Not flashy. Just a nudge to let anyone inspecting the wall know it wasn't built by accident. It was deliberate, planned, final. At exactly 6:12 a.m., the last trowel scraped the final smear of mortar across the cap row. The job was done. The crew packed up silently, taking their tools and leftover supplies with them. No one lingered. No selfies. No cheers. Just the sound of boots on gravel and a few tired smiles. I paid them in cash from the emergency stash I kept for storm damage, worth every penny. As they drove off, I stood in front of the wall, hands on my hips, watching the sky brighten. The breeze off the lake was cool and smelled like oak and water. I felt peace for the first time in weeks. That peace lasted for exactly 94 minutes. At 7:46 a.m., I heard the unmistakable screech of Karen's brake. Her powder blue SUV came to a jerky halt near the old access point. I stayed on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. She marched across the grass in her oversized sun hat, flip-flops smacking against her heels, carrying a Starbucks cup and a clipboard. When she turned the corner expecting to walk through her precious gate, she stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at the wall like it was a UFO. Mouth open, eyebrows twitching. She took 3 steps forward, raised her phone, and started filming. "This is a hate crime against the community," she screamed into her camera, spinning to face it. I didn't respond. Karen stormed toward the wall and banged on it with her fist. It didn't budge. She circled it, inspecting every inch for a weak point, but found none. Her voice rose. "This is illegal. This is aggressive landscaping. You're going to jail, Rob." I stayed calm, arms folded, and waited until she stormed up to my porch, waving her phone in my face. "Explain this," she demanded. "It's a wall," I said. "You can't do this. This isn't allowed. You're violating community integration clauses." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, this is private property." "My property." The fence was cut. "You brought dozens of people onto my land. I warned you. The wall is legal. It's decorative and within my zoning right." I checked. She scoffed. "No one builds a 12-foot-tall wall overnight for decoration." I shrugged. "Guess I'm not no one." She stormed off, filming herself with exaggerated outrage. "I'm contacting the HOA. I'm calling the county. This isn't over, Rob. This wall is harassment." Later that afternoon, I got a visit from a county code enforcement officer. Nice guy. Young. Nervous. He walked around the wall, took a few photos, and asked if I had documentation. I handed him a folder with zoning guidelines, property surveys, and a statement from Marcus confirming the legality of structures on AG land. After a quick glance, he smiled and said, "Honestly, I wish more people were this prepared. Looks good to me." He left without further issue. Karen, however, did not. Over the next 24 hours, she posted no less than 15 rants on the HOA Facebook page, most of them accusing me of constructing a tyrant wall and calling it a monument to male ego. Someone even edited a photo of the wall to include barbed wire and floodlights, claiming I had created a prison fortress. Another comment speculated I had joined a militia. Meanwhile, neighbors started wandering by to see the wall for themselves. A few laughed. One guy clapped. One woman shook her head and said, "Honestly, I'm surprised it took you this long." By the time evening rolled around, I'd heard from 3 local news outlets asking if I'd be willing to talk about the Great Wall of HOA. I declined, at least for now. The last thing I wanted was to make this story low. The sound of Karen's screaming voice reverberating off the brick wall was the morning alarm I hadn't asked for. It was 6:42 a.m. the next day, and there she stood again. This time with 3 HOA board members in tow, each one looking like they'd just been dragged out of bed and promised a crisis. One of them, a guy in a polo shirt with a clipboard tucked under his arm, stared up at the wall like it was some kind of cursed artifact. Another, a woman with a stiff expression and a name tag that read Vice Chair, Sunridge Meadows HOA, was already on her phone, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone. Karen, of course, was filming every angle of the structure like she was making a documentary titled, How I Was Oppressed by Masonry. I stayed inside for a while, letting the absurdity build. Through the window I watched as they poked the wall, took photos, and finally tried to argue with the brick itself, as if yelling loud enough would make it open up and apologize. Eventually, Karen banged on my door with enough force that I half expected it to crack. I opened it slowly, coffee in hand, and greeted her with a raised eyebrow and nothing else. "Explain this monstrosity," she hissed, stabbing her finger toward the air behind her. I sipped my coffee calmly. "It's a wall, Karen. You saw it yesterday. This is community sabotage. Psychological warfare. Do you understand what kind of trauma this is causing?" "You mean the trauma of not being able to trespass anymore?" I asked. The clipboard guy stepped forward. "Sir, we're requesting you remove the wall immediately. It's cutting off the designated access point." I blinked. "There is no designated access point. That's my land. Always has been." "We've voted on it," Karen interjected. "The board agrees that it serves the best interest of the neighborhood." I stepped out onto the porch. "You can vote to make the moon your clubhouse. Doesn't make it real. The land isn't yours. You cut a gate into my fence. You trespassed. I built a wall. That's it." The vice chair finally spoke, lowering her phone. "We've called a city inspector. You'll be hearing from him." "Already did," I said. "He was here yesterday. Said it's legal. Said it's beautiful, actually." Karen's face tightened. She looked betrayed by the very system she thought she controlled. But she wasn't done. That afternoon, she filed a formal complaint through the HOA Legal Committee, demanding that the wall be removed on the grounds that it disrupted neighborhood harmony and was erected without appropriate community consensus. She even claimed it was casting shadows over their events and creating an oppressive visual environment. I nearly choked on my sandwich reading that last part. But the real show began when she took it public. Karen contacted the local news station, spun a tale about a hostile wall dividing a peaceful lakeside community, and even claimed I had threatened children by creating an unsafe barrier near a recreation zone. The reporter, clearly intrigued by the drama, reached out to me for a statement. I considered declining again, but then I saw the headlines beginning to form online. "Man builds wall to keep HOA out. Community in uproar." One even said, "Rancher builds Berlin Wall in Texas backyard." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I called the reporter back. We scheduled an interview on my dock. I wore my cleanest flannel and told the story straight. How my property had been invaded, how my fence had been cut without permission, and how I'd simply protected what was mine. I didn't rant. I didn't insult. I showed documents, photos, even a drone video of the original crowd waltzing through my land like it was a water park. The segment aired the next evening. Karen's soundbites were emotional and loud. Mine were calm and backed with evidence. The viewers saw the difference instantly. Comments online exploded. Support poured in from strangers across the state. "That man's a hero. We need more walls like his." Karen finally met her match. One guy even offered to build a moat. The fallout in the HOA came fast. Board members started to splinter. Some didn't want to be associated with the gate-cutting scandal anymore. Two quietly resigned after my lawyer served the HOA with a notice of property encroachment regarding the clubhouse issue. That shook them hard. They realized that not only did they have no legal standing to force me to remove the wall, but they might actually owe me rent for the portion of my land their building sat on. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the landowner who held the receipts. Karen fought harder, of course. She organized a community protest walk and tried to rally residents to demand access through my property again. Only 8 people showed up, 3 of whom were her immediate family. They walked in circles near the wall holding cardboard signs. One said, "Tear down the tyranny." Another said, "Our lake too." A kid held a sign that just said, "Karen for Justice." The whole thing looked more like a confused school play than a protest. At one point, she brought in a lawyer, someone from a boutique firm who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He reviewed the documents, my deed, the footage, the wall specs, and then quietly advised her to back off. She fired him on the spot. Then she tried to post screenshots of his emails in the HOA group, claiming he was compromised. More board members started to distance themselves. A new acting chair was appointed, someone I'd never met before, a quiet man named Daniel who reached out to me privately and apologized for the mess. He said he'd been unaware how far things had gone and that he didn't want the HOA to be dragged into Karen's crusade any longer. I appreciated that. We weren't friends, but at least he was sane. As Karen's influence crumbled, the wall only grew more iconic. People took selfies with it. Someone added it to Google Maps as Karen's Folly. I walked out one morning to find a group of local college students sketching it for an art project. One of them asked if she could paint a mural on the HOA-facing side. I told her she could, as long as she kept it tasteful. She grinned and promised it would be a tribute to property rights. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I liked the sound of it. Then came the final twist I didn't see coming. The county tax office sent me a notice about a parcel of land adjacent to the lake, specifically, a narrow stretch that ran behind the HOA's clubhouse. Apparently, it had been improperly filed years ago and had gone unclaimed. It was up for public auction. No one else seemed interested. I placed a bid. A modest one. And I won. With that purchase, I now legally owned the strip of land under the rear third of their building. I had become, quite literally, their landlord. Marcus and I filed the necessary papers. Within weeks, an official letter went out to the HOA leadership. Effective immediately, they were to pay monthly rent or face eviction from the building. Karen lost her mind. She accused me of sabotage, of witchcraft, of having deep state connections. She tried to call an emergency HOA meeting, but by then, the board had lost faith in her. Daniel announced her removal from the leadership group, citing repeated abuse of authority and misrepresentation of legal boundaries. She didn't go quietly. She stood outside the clubhouse, shouting about injustice, until someone called her husband to come take her home. That was the last time I saw her near. By the time summer crept into full swing, the wall had taken on a life of its own. What began as a bold message to a boundary-ignorant HOA had turned into something far bigger. Locals now referred to it as a landmark. Google Maps had accepted the submission, and people driving past the Sunridge Meadows subdivision often pulled over to snap a picture. Some brought coffee and lawn chairs and treated the brick wall like a roadside attraction. I even found a drone video someone posted online with music edited over it like it was a trailer for a mini-documentary. It was titled "One Man, One Wall. No More Karens." It had over 200,000 views in a week. Despite the growing popularity, I hadn't seen Karen herself in weeks. After her very public fall from HOA grace, she'd retreated into the shadows, licking her wounds and, from what I heard, trying to rally support in other neighborhoods by portraying herself as a martyr for community unity. Unfortunately for her, the only ones listening were a couple of equally delusional HOA wannabes and a local blogger who wrote conspiracy theories about land laws. Meanwhile, my quiet little victory continued unfolding in real time, and I hadn't even played my last card yet. The rent invoices for the portion of land under the HOA clubhouse had gone out and, predictably, the board tried to delay paying. But my attorney had made the terms airtight. They had 60 days from acquisition or they would be considered tenants in default. When day 60 arrived and no payment came through, Marcus filed the eviction notice. It was clean, legal, and dropped at their next board meeting like a thunderclap in a church. You'd think I'd set off fireworks inside their conference room. The aftermath was glorious. Daniel, now acting as HOA president, called me personally to discuss terms. I invited him to the ranch. He arrived wearing a button-up shirt and holding a folder filled with paperwork. Unlike Karen, he actually listened when I spoke. We sat by the lake, away from the wall, and I laid out my options calmly. Either they paid a fair rental rate and signed a formal lease agreement with strict limits on land usage, or they vacated the building within 30 days. To my surprise, Daniel didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "Honestly, I don't even know why we kept defending that gate. No one wanted this fight but her." We signed the lease later that week. The new terms stripped the HOA of any future claim to the lakeside or my property line. They were also forbidden from holding any events within 30 feet of the wall. My land, my rules, on paper and in stone. I even had the lease laminated. Meanwhile, the mural on the wall was finally completed. The college students had returned with ladders, paints, and a vision. What emerged was hilarious, respectful, and brilliant all at once. The mural featured a whimsical cartoon of a clipboard-wielding Karen banging on a wall that towered into the clouds. Around her were confused HOA members holding maps, yoga mats, and signs that read "Lake Freedom Now." On my side of the wall, a cartoon version of me sat in a lawn chair with a cowboy hat, sipping coffee, and reading a newspaper titled, "HOA Defeated Again." It was tasteful. It was funny. And it somehow managed to capture every ridiculous moment of the saga in one panorama. I didn't ask them to paint it, but I gave them a barbecue dinner when they finished. After the mural gained traction online, even the local news returned for a follow-up story. This time, they framed it as a triumph of property rights, personal boundaries, and, unexpectedly, art. The segment ended with a shot of me standing beside the wall, grinning while a butterfly landed on my shoulder. The internet loved it. Karen must have screamed into a pillow. About 2 weeks later, I received an invitation from a local civic group asking if I'd speak at one of their events about standing up to neighborhood overreach. I declined. Not because I didn't appreciate the sentiment, but because I wasn't interested in becoming some symbolic figurehead in a war against HOAs. I didn't hate HOAs in general. Some served their purpose. Mine had just been hijacked by a woman who confused clipboards with crowns. I wasn't out for revenge. I was out for peace. And I finally had it. That didn't stop the calls, though. Other homeowners from nearby towns started reaching out, asking for advice on dealing with their own Karens. One guy emailed me saying he printed a picture of my wall and hung it in his garage as motivation. Another wanted to fly in from Colorado just to take a selfie with it. I didn't mind. In fact, I made a small wooden bench facing the mural and added a discreet sign that read, "Respect Boundaries." People took the hint. The most surprising visitor of all, however, was Karen's husband. He came by one quiet evening while I was cleaning my boat dock. I looked up and there he was, hands in his pockets, head low. "I won't take up much of your time," he said. "I just wanted to say something off the record." I nodded, setting my tools down. "Go ahead." "She lost her mind," he said. "She thought she was building something noble. Thought she was protecting the community. But it stopped being about community a long time ago. She just couldn't admit she was wrong." I said nothing, just waited. "I'm sorry for what she put you through." I tried to talk her down. I did. But she doesn't listen to anyone when she's got a mission. "Anyway, thanks for handling it the way you did." I shook his hand and nodded. I didn't say anything more. There was nothing to say. The damage was done. The wall had been built. But it was oddly humanizing to hear someone close to her admit the truth. Not all Karens are born villains. Some just get so high on the idea of authority that they lose track of the people standing in front of them. In the months that followed, the ranch returned to normal. My fence was repaired and reinforced with steel posts. The wall remained, standing tall, now less a symbol of defiance and more of a quiet joke between neighbors. Occasionally, someone new to the area would ask, "Hey, what's with the giant brick wall in the middle of the fence line?" And I'd grin and say, That's the line between what's mine and what people think is theirs." One day, as I walked my dog along the shoreline, I noticed something odd. A small wooden sign had been propped up near the outside of the wall. It read, in shaky handwriting, "We were wrong. Enjoy your peace." It wasn't signed, but I had a pretty good idea where it came from. I didn't move the sign. I let it stay. Maybe it was the HOA's quiet olive branch. Maybe it was Karen herself trying to reclaim a piece of her dignity. Either way, it didn't matter. The wall didn't come down. The gate didn't return. But the fighting had stopped. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. As the sun set that evening, casting gold across the surface of the lake, I sat on the porch with my boots up, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, and my dog curled at my feet. The wind rustled through the trees gently. There were no floaties in the water, no strangers dragging coolers across my lawn, no screaming about bylaws or community consensus. There was only quiet, and a wall that stood as tall as the line that Karen had crossed, and never dared to cross again.